Good morning. It is Tuesday, the 10th of March. I'm Maeve McMahon and this is Europe Today. Your daily dose of European news and analysis live here on Euronews. Coming up, no end in sight for the war in Iran, despite claims from President Trump of otherwise. In a sign that the conflict is escalating on all fronts, Iranian missiles have been intercepted over Turkey, Qatar and the United Arab Emirates, while Israel continues to target Iran and Lebanon. There are reports of over 1,200 dead in Iran and almost 500 people in Lebanon, including 83 children. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has called the selection of Mojtaba Khamenei as the next Supreme Leader a, quote, big mistake. The son of the late Supreme Leader has already reportedly been injured. This as EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas calls for a ceasefire to stop Lebanon from sliding into chaos. She says Israel's heavy-handed response to Hezbollah attacks is destabilising the whole region. To bring us up to speed, Euronews has correspondents all across the region. For the latest from Doha, we can now cross over to Qatar and bring in our correspondent, Adel Halim. Good morning, Adel. Look, we're hearing reports this morning of more disruptions, more explosions all across the Middle East. Can you just tell us what is the latest this Tuesday morning?
Maeve, we're now into the second week of this conflict, and you're right, there appears to be no signs of letting up. In fact, the situation around the Gulf only appears to be intensifying. In Bahrain, a 29-year-old woman was killed and 8 others injured in what the country's authorities say was a residential building, an attack on a residential building in the capital. And now that's one of the clearest signs yet that civilians are now being drawn into this conflict. Iran has also targeted the country's energy infrastructure. Bahrain's state energy company, Bapco Energy, says an attack set the country's only oil refinery on fire, forcing it to declare a force majeure. Now that comes as well as Qatar and Kuwait in suspending some energy shipments as Iran escalates strikes on oil and gas facilities across the region. And that's already having a ripple effect globally. Oil prices surged again on Monday, with Brent crude, the international benchmark, briefly climbing to nearly $120 per barrel. That's the highest level since the months following Russia's invasion on Ukraine in 2022. Here in Doha, people experienced several elevated alerts on Monday. Just after 3 p.m. was the last one where we received the national emergency alert on our phone, which was followed by a barrage of explosions in the skies above. Now, likely the most intense and impactful that we've heard since the beginning of this conflict. Now, Qatar's Ministry of Defense has intercepted 17 ballistic missiles and 6 drones in that attack alone. Also on Monday, Qatar's Prime Minister took part in a virtual joint session between leaders from the GCC and the European Union. Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdurrahman bin Jassim Al Thani warned that the current situation doesn't just affect one country, but it threatens security of the entire region and poses serious risks to global energy markets and supply chains. He also reaffirmed Qatar's commitment to working with regional and international partners, including the EU, to try to de-escalate the conflict. Maeve?
OK, Adel Halim, thank you so much for that live update there from Doha. Meanwhile, Russia's President Vladimir Putin and US President Donald Trump also discussed the Iran war during a, quote, frank and constructive telephone call. This as we see dramatic moves on the oil market, reversing its biggest surge in nearly 4 years. Speaking to the press, President Trump says the war in Iran may be over soon, after initially signalling it could go on for another 5 weeks. For more, we're joined here in the studio by Euronews' EU editor, Maria Tadeo. Good morning, Maria.
Good morning.
So look, is President Trump playing to the financial markets here, or does he really think the war could be over sooner rather than later?
Well, that's a very good question, and it really is the question this morning. Obviously, we need some context in terms of where those comments came in. On the Sunday to the Monday, we saw that big spike when it comes to the oil market. A lot of that reflecting this anxiety that in Iran is still very much the hardliners who are guiding the country, and obviously a sort of escalation that is going to have ramifications in the transportation of oil in the region. The comments from Trump yesterday appeared to suggest that the U.S. now believes this is an operation they can wrap sooner. He did say the war is pretty much, to some extent, done. He talked about objectives that have been met, but of course it is unclear what the goal then would be because the son of the late Ayatollah is still in place. Now, the other factor, too, is that in the same afternoon, then he went out and said again, if this is a question of Iran really trying to mess with the transportation of oil, there will be severe consequences and they will get bombed like they've not been bombed since this war started. Let's take a look.
We're putting an end to all of this threat once and for all, and the result will be lower oil prices, oil and gas prices. But when the time comes, the U.S. Navy and its partners will escort tankers through the strait if needed. And if they do anything, the price will be incalculable. They'll never be able to recover, ever.
And that's, of course, President Trump. But if you listen to the language, this is really a message to financial markets. He repeats and goes on about the price of oil. What will happen if they do anything that messes with the flow of oil? He is a president, and this is very particular and very important to understand when it comes to Donald Trump, is that he really monitors the stock market and he really monitors financial markets overall as is almost reflection of his performance. And this is a president who has said in the early days of the campaign for re-election that he wants to see stock markets up. So really, he likes to present himself as the all-time high for stocks in the U.S. and also very low energy prices. This is crucial in the U.S. The gas prices, this is something that is almost politically in the psyche of the U.S., incredibly important. So yesterday, those comments trying to reverse those losses that we saw in the early trading on the Monday and the spike in the oil. But what I would note, however, is that ultimately, Maeve, this is very simple. Either he manages a way to find the oil to flow and to move and to bring down prices, or ultimately this will just be a one-day message to bring down and intervene in energy markets. But ultimately, no question and no answers as to how is this operation really going to play out on the ground.
And meanwhile, here in Brussels, we're having these emergency talks, remote emergency talks among EU leaders today, and also finance ministers are meeting yesterday and today.
Yeah, so finance ministers met yesterday. There was also a G7 finance ministers call led by France, and today there will be a G7 energy ministers. And we also understand it's going to be a busy day on the phone, that there will be an EU leaders sort of debrief that is handled by Italy, Germany and Belgium. So it's this new sort of coalition that is emerging. Nonetheless, what is relevant from these calls is that ultimately there has been a signal that if it is necessary and needed, there could be operations to export or to escort tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. Obviously, that's a crucial point for geopolitics, but also the idea that there could be a release of strategic reserves. This is not the moment. That's what the French said yesterday, but a concern from the Europeans that you could enter a sort of stagflation scenario if global growth is impacted and you continue to see this spike in oil, which then reflects in inflation. So at this point, it is a sort of wait and see from the Europeans with concerns on the global economy.
OK, and we have extensive reporting on all those meetings, of course, on yournews.com. Maria Tadeo, thank you so much for that update, as always. But now, moving on. In this context of an escalating war and a major oil supply disruption, MEPs are gathering in Strasbourg this week for a routine plenary session. To hear their views on the current state of play, we can actually cross now to the European Parliament in Strasbourg and bring in Euronews' Marad Gwynne-Jones. Good morning, Marad. Tell us, what is the view from Strasbourg there on the US-Israeli war on Iran?
Yes, Maeve, good morning from the European Parliament. Now, this institution doesn't set the EU's foreign policy, of course, but traditionally it has taken a staunchly critical stance towards the Iranian regime. And to discuss more, I'm now joined by the chair of the Parliament's Iran delegation, MEP Hannah Neumann. Good morning. Let me start with this. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has been killed in this war, only to be replaced by his son. Is this war doing anything, in your view, to help the Iranian people?
Good morning from Strasbourg. And Ayatollah Khamenei was responsible for the death and the brutal repression for so many Iranians. So his death has sparked some hopes, but him being replaced with his son just signals a sign of continuity and of more repression. So this clearly is not what Iranians had hoped for.
OK, and yesterday we heard Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen saying there's two schools of thought here with this war. One saying this is a war of choice by the US and Israel, and the other saying, well, this is a war of necessity, this was needed. Where do you stand?
Donald Trump promised that help is on the way to the protesters before he started this war. Right now, we see him, and I mean, some of you saw the press conference yesterday. It is quite unclear what his goals are, what his strategies are to get there. And he's gambling with the life of 90 million Iranians and the whole region. And I frankly say I can't endorse a war. I don't know what the goal is, nor what the strategy is, and the Iranians clearly deserve better.
You say you don't know what the goal is. If it is regime change, is it right in your view to seek a change in the regime through force?
It will be quite a difficult way to get to regime change. What is clear is that in the long run, regime change can only come from the inside. So when people from the Revolutionary Guards, from the army, defect, and when there's a broad coalition of people from inside and outside of Iran who represent the diversity of Iran, who really come up with a new vision for this country, this cannot come by bombs alone.
And in this context, then, what can the EU do? We've seen quite a fragmented response. Spain and Slovenia outliers in the condemnation of the initial attack. What can it do to exert diplomatic leverage here and urge de-escalation?
I think we have to indeed urge for de-escalation. The first thing is to work together with the Gulf countries. This is not our war, right? We have to deal with the consequences. And the same is true for the Gulf countries, even worse. So I think we should work together with the Gulf countries to push for de-escalation towards Trump and Israel, to clearly make them understand what they are gambling with and to tell us what their goals, what their strategies are, and then have a reasonable discussion, but also towards the Iranian regime, because the regime is going to fall. The question is how many of its own people and how much of the region are they dragging into the abyss, and I think we should make this as short as possible.
OK, MEP Neumann, thank you so much. And Maeve, there will be a 3-hour special debate here in the Parliament tomorrow morning on the escalation situation in the Middle East. Back to you.
OK, Mairead Gwynne-Jones, thank you so much for that live update there from Strasbourg. And also to your guest, the Green MEP Hannah Neumann. Now, just days after his appointment, Iranians are very much divided over their new Supreme Leader, Mojtaba Khamenei. Iranian state TV is just showing his supporters celebrating with joy, but many also Iranians are expressing fear of repression. Critics worried, of course, about his very strong connections to the IRGC. Jakub Janis takes a closer look.
Someone clever once said that history is not about recording dates, but about connecting the dots. Iran has named Mojtaba Khamenei as its new supreme leader, and now everyone is talking about his biography. But your reporter wants to take a different look. Let's analyze what his appointment actually means. And for Europe, that signals a cold winter of diplomacy. Mojtaba is a shadow operator with deep ties in the Revolutionary Guard. His rise suggests Tehran has no interest in negotiations, and Europe must prepare for 3 shocks. First, the war will not end quickly. Mojtaba is a hardline choice for a hardline moment. And second, oil prices are already surging past $100, threatening a new energy crisis. Third is a migration risk. That instability could trigger an unprecedented refugee wave toward European borders. And for the US and Israel, Mojtaba is not a statesman, he is a target. Israel's defense minister was blunt about it, calling him an unequivocal target for elimination. And for a man who lost his father, mother and wife in recent strikes, compromise with the US and Israel might be simply off the table. Finally, and most importantly, what does this mean for Iranians? For the people, this transition could feel like the ultimate betrayal of the 1979 revolution. Because after all, that uprising was meant to end hereditary monarchy forever. And Mojtaba inherits a nation in economic ruin, relying entirely on the military and hardline security forces to keep control. And after the recent bloody crackdown on the opposition, he isn't fighting for the Iranian people, but for the survival of the system. But one could ask, can a revolution survive by becoming the very thing it once overthrew?
Jakob Yanis there. Now, moving on, France and its allies are preparing a, quote, defensive mission to reopen the strategically vital Strait of Hormuz. President Emmanuel Macron has said the French president has already landed by helicopter on the Charles de Gaulle aircraft carrier that was dispatched to the Mediterranean just after the US-Israeli strikes on Iran back on February the 28th. For more on the purpose of his trip, we can cross now over to Paris and bring in our correspondent, Sofia Katsankova. Good morning, Sofia. Just tell us, what is the message that Macron is trying to send with this trip?
Well, Maeve, the message that Emmanuel Macron is trying to send is that he will not be directly involved in the conflict, even as France strengthens its military presence in the region. Speaking aboard the aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle, deployed in the eastern Mediterranean last night, the French president insisted that France is not taking part directly in the war, but is looking to reassure its allies and protect its interests in the region. Earlier on Monday, Macron also traveled to Cyprus, an EU member state that has become strategically important in the region as tensions escalate. Just as a reminder, earlier this month, a drone struck a British military base on this island, prompting several EU countries, including France, to reinforce its defense. And speaking during his visit to Cyprus yesterday, Macron framed the island's security as a broader European issue. Let's take a listen.
When Cyprus is attacked, it is Europe that is attacked. Cyprus' defense is obviously an essential matter for your country, for your neighbor, partner and friend, Greece, but also for France and with it, for the European Union.
And as you mentioned, Maeve, well, France is also working along with other partners on a future purely defensive naval mission to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz and escort commercial ships, according to Macron, which is a key route for global energy supplies. And speaking of energy, well, the French leader is back here in Paris on a Tuesday morning as he's hosting an international summit on nuclear power today. The meeting is expected to focus on expanding nuclear capacity as countries are looking for stable energy sources amid growing geopolitical tensions. And of course, I'll be bringing you the latest from the ground. Back to you, Maeve.
And of course, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will be speaking at that very conference you mentioned. Sofia Katsankova, thank you so much for that live update there from the centre of Paris. And to dive deeper into President Macron's visit and goals, we're joined now by Pascal Confafreux, the spokesperson for the French Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs. Good morning, Pascal. Thank you so much for joining us. Just tell us more about Macron's mission in Cyprus. Is the war getting closer to home, in your view?
No, our goal is to go for de-escalation to avoid any regionalization of the conflict. President Macron was in Cyprus yesterday, and then on the aircraft carrier, there were three messages: solidarity with Cyprus, protection of our citizens, protection of our allies in the region, such as the EU, Qatar, and so on, and he made it more clear the goal of a coalition for the freedom of navigation in the Red Sea and into the Strait of Hormuz.
But you say only defensive, but is there any chance we could see this shift and France getting more involved in this conflict?
No. Once again, our position is that it's not our war. It is a strike by the United States and Israel and Iran were made out of international law. We cannot approve them. But once again, what we have to see is who is responsible first of this situation. It is Iran. Iran was posing a major threat to the region with its program of ballistic missiles or nuclear armament. And so Iran has to change dramatically. It's our message that we conveyed, and even conveyed directly when President Macron talked to President Pezeshkian of Iran during the week.
So, Pascal, you're very critical of Iran, but is it time now to condemn the US and Israel? I mean, they started with good intentions, but now the situation is spiralling out of control.
Once again, the first responsibility of the situation is the threat caused by Iran, even more after the state violence that they imposed on their own people at the beginning of this year, in January. This is where things have to stop. Iran has to stop sending some missiles and some drones on the neighboring countries, and the other, because we have to avoid or prevent any regionalization or destabilization of countries. I can take the example of Lebanon, which is a country that risks the war.
Pascal. Pascal Confrafou, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us today on Europe Today here on Euronews. And thank you so much for watching. As always, for more news and analysis, do visit euronews.com. Take care and see you very soon here on Euronews.